Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I want to go over some new information we've gotten for Tiny Tina's Wonderlands that goes over our stat allocation and what these stats do. And similar to everything else in Wonderlands, it's a pretty big departure from the other Borderlands games, and one of those big things is actually getting hero points throughout the game that you put into a choice of 6 different stats that boost different aspects of the game, which much more mimics more deep RPG experiences. So once your class and starting look are locked in, you can further tailor your build by tinkering with your starting stat. There are 6 basic attributes you can influence during character creation, and these are strength, which is critical hit damage increases, dexterity, which is base critical hit chance increases, intelligence, which is spell cooldown rate increase, wisdom, which is status effect damage increase, constitution, which is an increase to maximum health or ward, and attunement, which is action skill cooldown rate increases. And this mimics more deep RPG experiences in video games instead of trying to mimic the actual stat sheets of something like Dungeons and Dragons, where this game clearly gets a lot of inspiration from, which makes much more sense, especially for something like a Borderlands game, because having these dozens of different possible stats that can affect every little small thing like you would have in a tabletop game really wouldn't work in a game like this compared to the stats we just went over. It's time to choose a dramatic backstory for your Fate Maker. Were they raised by elves, or perhaps they were the village idiot? Your backstory will give you a starting place to mold your character's stat attributes. Afterwards, you can apply an additional 10 hero points anywhere you wish. Note that 10 hero points in any given stat is the baseline, where you won't see a positive or negative impact to the corresponding effect. If you only have 8 intelligence points, for example, falling short of the 10-point baseline means your spells will take longer to recharge. So essentially, through all that information, you choose a backstory that is somehow going to affect some base statting. So maybe if you're the town idiot, you would have more strength but a really low intelligence. And this is most likely going to be, if you choose village idiot, you couldn't just reallocate those backstory stats. And I'm not sure how much this is gonna be, but this could potentially mean you will want to kind of have an idea of what kind of build you're going to want to go for with choosing your backstory, but I doubt it's going to be any major factor in endgame builds. But then after you choose your backstory, you can apply an additional 10 hero points anywhere you want to. And then the base information for these stats is that when these stats are at a neutral point is when they're at 10 points. So 10 means you get no negative effects or no positive effects. So if you're at 10 at strength, you don't have any increase or decrease in critical damage. If you go down to say 8 strength, you would get reduced critical hit damage. But if you go up to 12 strength, you're going to get an increase into critical hit damage. So there is actually some positive and negatives to putting a bunch of points into specific stats, but most likely we will probably see a few stats being used for a lot of builds and the other stats being heavily ignored. But I think this does give a lot more build variety with you needing to actually make some meaningful choices. So if you put everything into base critical hit chance, you may have higher spell cooldown rate, so you can't focus a lot on that in the build. Or if you want to go all strength dexterity, maybe you wouldn't have a lot of health or ward, so you'd be super squishy. So there's a lot of give and take in this system. And again, like I mentioned, it mimics much more of those deep RPG experiences. Now, with all that being said, you can still respec at any of the quick change stations. Like you can respec your voice or your character personality or your looks, anything like that. You can still go respec. And I'm curious how much you can respec, because you have your backstory that somehow affects your stats. Then you have your 10 starting points that somehow affects your stats. And then you'll have all the points you get while leveling up. Now, I'm assuming that you can't change the backstory stats, but you can change your 10 starting points and all of your additional gained points through leveling up and playing the game. And also, this doesn't say if we're only going to be getting hero points from leveling up, because what a lot of other RPGs also do is they'll allow you to get hero points in other ways, say doing specific quests, or maybe killing certain bosses, or doing certain objectives, or finding like a hidden stone or something somewhere that gives you some additional hero points. Even say in the new big MMORPG Lost Ark, they have a ton of objectives throughout the game that give you additional skill points just for doing a bunch of different objectives past getting to max level. And something that's also very interesting with these stats is that these are all pretty generic. And what I mean by that is they're not super specific. So you have critical hit damage, base critical hit chance, spell cooldown rate, status effect damage, maximum health or ward, and action skill cooldown rate. None of these are ultra specific. And something I'm really curious to see is how critical hit damage and critical hit chance work, because with this going off of base critical hit chance off of dexterity, it seems like there's a possibility that everything in the game just has a chance to crit. So whether it be a melee, a gunshot, a spell, or a class ability. So we're not exactly sure how that's going to work, but it seems like through this that most likely every different piece that I just mentioned can be affected by a lot of this. But again, not exactly sure because they didn't clarify that. It could also be that strength and dexterity, so critical hit damage and critical hit chance, are for weapons, and then intelligence is for spells, and then attunement is for your action skills. That could potentially make sense as well, but I'm definitely more going towards all of these stats being able to affect pretty much every point of combat in the game. Because say if like a melee attack didn't go off of the base critical hit chance of dexterity or the critical hit damage off of strength, those two stats are kind of completely useless for all melee builds, and I don't think they would want to make it that locked down, especially in a Borderlands game, which has kind of always been completely unlocked or free with your builds. But that's pretty much all the information we have for stat distribution and hero points in Wonderlands. Now, also keep in mind that you also have one skill tree for every class. So once you get halfway through the game and you multi-class, you have 2 skill trees with separate points, which I'm pretty sure they're just calling talent points again, where you put a bunch of talent points into those. So those are also on top of these hero points that are additional stats. And that's also on top of all of your statting and effects from your rings, your amulets, your weapons, all that type of stuff. And also my closing thought, I hope that enemies, at least in the end game, are generally a bit tankier than a lot of the other Borderlands games, especially with all of these additional stats we have, and especially with us being able to build ourselves much more tanky, spell cooldown, status effects especially. I hope that stuff is a little bit more tanky in general to allow us to make use of all of the build and stat potentials that we will have access to. But that's pretty much all I want to go over. So subscribe if you want to see more Wonderlands or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about these stats and hero points. And thanks for watching.